As the king and queen leave the thrones and head for the exit of Westminster Abbey of the coronation ceremony, you'll see that everyone bows and curtsies to the king, and no one moves a limb, a muscle, when Camilla passes.
Princess Anne had faced family scandals, constitutional crises, and private betrayals without flinching. But inside a locked room at Windsor Castle, one sealed file achieved what decades of royal pressure never had. As Anne reached the final page, her fingers stopped moving. The documents did not merely expose a private disagreement. They revealed a coordinated proposal, linked directly to Queen Camilla, to alter the future rules of royal succession. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. The summons had arrived without warning. A senior archivist requested Anne's presence in a restricted records room after discovering a collection filed under the wrong reference code. Windsor Castle was not only a royal residence, it also held private papers shaping the monarchy's future. The folder was marked Household Constitutional Correspondence, Private, meaning private letters and legal discussions about royal authority. Anne opened the first document expecting theory. Instead, she found a confidential plan supported by Camilla's office. It proposed giving the reigning monarch wider discretion over which senior descendants could perform constitutional duties, control estates, influence appointments, and exercise authority during a regency. A regency is the temporary system used when a sovereign cannot carry out official duties. The plan did not remove Prince William or Prince George from the legal succession, but it could weaken the power they were expected to inherit. The Princess Royal kept reading. Dates matched private meetings. Handwritten notes appeared beside legal phrases. One page carried an approval mark linked to the Queen Consort's office. Anne's doubt collapsed, because these were no longer loose ideas passed between lawyers. They were documented steps, arranged with names, timings, and instructions. Then one sentence changed everything. William was described as a potential obstacle to continuity. Anne lowered the page and gripped the table. The archivist watched her face harden, then lose all expression. Elizabeth II had spent decades preparing the future king to protect the crown. Yet someone had reduced that future to a problem requiring control. Anne ordered the door locked. She told the archivist that no copy, note, or message was to leave the room. Her voice stayed level, but when she closed the file, the brass clasp struck the cover with a final snap. A second envelope slipped from beneath the papers. Anne opened it and found a documented account of a private meeting involving Camilla, King Charles, and an unnamed constitutional advisor. The proposal had reached the monarch's circle. Anne had discovered the plan, but before confronting anyone, she needed to know who had secretly protected it, and whether her own brother had already chosen a side. Behind every constitutional phrase in the hidden file stood a human relationship already close to breaking. Anne saw William's future placed beneath legal scrutiny, Camilla's influence written into private recommendations, and Charles caught between his wife and the dynasty he had sworn to preserve. This was no longer simply a question of succession. It was a family conflict, disguised as royal procedure, and every person named in those pages had something deeply personal to lose. Princess Anne had built her life around one promise. After Queen Elizabeth II's death, she had privately vowed that grief, loyalty, and family emotion would never be allowed to weaken the institution. The crown was not simply a jewel or title. It was the system of duty, authority, and continuity surrounding the sovereign and the heirs who would follow. Anne now felt that promise tightening around her. William had spent years preparing for the throne, learning how to manage estates, support national institutions, and eventually carry the weight Charles now held. Yet the hidden files suggested that senior figures had quietly questioned whether his independence would leave Camilla with enough influence once the next reign began. The thought did not make Anne furious at first. It made her deeply sad. She imagined the future king reading the phrase that described him as an obstacle and realizing his own family had discussed his leadership as something to contain. Camilla's fear was equally personal. She believed William might restructure the royal household after becoming king, removing trusted staff, reducing her role, and closing the private circle that had protected her during Charles's reign. The royal household was the network of officials and staff who supported the monarch and senior family members. Losing that circle would leave her respected in title, but powerless in practice. Charles stood between both futures. He wanted to protect his wife from humiliation, yet he had publicly defended the direct line of succession through William and George. Any secret attempt to weaken that path would place his marriage against the duty he had sworn to uphold. William received Anne's message after a Windsor engagement. He read the handwritten words twice. "Remain behind. Come alone." The prince looked toward his aide, folded the note, and quietly dismissed him without explanation. Camilla sensed the change almost immediately. Charles ended their afternoon conversation early and refused to explain why his sister had requested access to constitutional papers. She watched him leave, knowing silence from the king often meant he was hiding a conflict he had not yet decided how to face. Anne still refused to show William the documents. Before she shattered his trust, she needed one answer. Had Charles knowingly approved the proposal, or had others used his authority while he looked away? To uncover the truth, Anne would have to trace the plan back to the moment it began, and that trail led to one private ceremony, where a single exchange changed everything. The conspiracy had not begun with lawyers or sealed constitutional drafts. It began during a private royal ceremony 18 months earlier, when a carefully planned transfer of authority exposed a fear Camilla had never spoken aloud. What appeared to be a routine signing became the point of no return. One remark from William, one visible reaction from the Queen, and one late-night conversation with Charles transformed private insecurity into a campaign capable of reshaping the monarchy. Charles had already begun passing greater responsibility to his eldest son. William was taking control of royal estates, ceremonial planning, and several household decisions that would prepare him for the throne. Those changes mattered, because whoever controlled staff appointments, property access, and official budgets could quietly shape the daily power of the monarchy, long before the crown itself changed hands. Camilla heard the warnings from her advisors in private documented briefings. They told her that once the Prince of Wales controlled those areas, her own circle could shrink, her access could narrow, and her influence might fade even while the king was still alive. She listened without reacting, but the fear settled deeply. The breaking point came during a private duchy coordination ceremony at Buckingham Palace. A duchy is a royal estate that provides income, property, and administrative power to senior members of the family. Charles formally authorized William to oversee a group of royal residences and future state event planning, believing the transfer would show confidence and continuity. William accepted the responsibility calmly. Then he said every future arrangement must serve the direct continuity of the crown rather than private households. The prince did not raise his voice, and he did not name anyone. Yet Camilla understood the sentence as a warning, aimed directly at her. The queen consort stopped writing. She looked across the table at William, held his gaze for a moment, then placed the pen beside the unfinished program. Charles noticed the gesture but continued the ceremony, hoping silence would prevent conflict. Instead, his silence gave the moment even greater weight. Camilla confronted him later that night in his private study. According to a recorded account preserved by her secretary, she told Charles that William was preparing to erase everything connected to their shared reign. The king tried to reassure her that no decision had been made against her, but he refused to challenge his son openly. That refusal changed her fear into resolve. She left the room convinced that kind words would not protect her future. Within days, her private secretary arranged a consultation with a constitutional advisor about continuity safeguards. The phrase sounded harmless, but it later appeared throughout every hidden proposal Anne had uncovered. Princess Anne found the earliest draft, dated the morning after the ceremony. Beneath it lay a handwritten instruction: develop the plan without William's knowledge until the monarch was ready to act. The origin was now undeniable, but understanding why the plan began did not make it less dangerous, and Anne knew the next step could only be a direct confrontation. Anne did not summon a committee, alert the palace press office, or give Camilla time to prepare an explanation. She requested a private meeting and ordered the room cleared. No aides, no secretaries, no legal representatives. When the door closed, the Princess Royal placed the hidden file between them and asked one devastating question: how far had the Queen been willing to go to protect her position after William became king? The silence hardened immediately. Clarence House had been chosen because it stood away from Windsor's archivists and Buckingham Palace's constitutional offices. A constitutional office is the part of the royal household that handles legal duties, succession matters, and the monarch's formal authority. Anne wanted no official machinery around them. She wanted answers. Princess Anne placed 3 documents on the table. The first was the original proposal. The second recorded consultations with legal advisors. The third described William as an obstacle to continuity and outlined ways to limit his future control over royal appointments. Camilla did not touch the papers. She insisted they were contingency discussions, meant to protect Charles during illness or incapacity. A contingency plan is a set of emergency arrangements prepared in case the sovereign cannot perform his duties. Her voice remained steady, but Anne heard the strain beneath it. The Princess Royal pushed the final page across the table. She pointed to clauses extending beyond the present reign and into the future king's authority. The Queen Consort looked down, recognized the handwriting in the margin, and stopped defending the document. Camilla admitted she had authorized discussions. She insisted she never intended to remove William or George from the succession. She wanted protection from being discarded the moment Charles was gone, stripped of staff, access, influence, and the life she had spent years building beside him. Anne's anger sharpened. She told her that fear did not justify placing personal survival above the crown's established future. The monarchy could not bend its principles whenever someone feared losing power. Camilla's composure finally cracked. She said William had already decided what her place would be, and that everyone inside the family had pretended not to see it. The prince, she believed, intended to close her circle and erase her influence the moment he inherited the throne. Anne closed the file. She replied that dignity could be protected, but authority could not be secretly preserved through constitutional interference. Charles would now hear the truth with both women present. Camilla asked the question she had been avoiding. Had William seen the papers? Anne rose, paused at the door, and answered, "Not yet." The Queen Consort now had one final chance to speak honestly. The confrontation exposed her motive, but the final authority still rested with Charles, and his decision would determine whether the hidden plan died quietly or shattered the family publicly. Charles entered the meeting expecting another family dispute that could be contained through patience and private compromise. Then, Anne placed the final authorization page before him. At the bottom sat a signature that transformed the crisis. It did not enact the proposed changes, but it permitted formal legal development under the authority of the sovereign. The handwriting was unmistakable. The king had allowed the plan to advance, and now he had to explain whether love had overruled duty. The private library fell silent. Princess Anne laid out the complete chain of correspondence, while Camilla remained seated across from her husband. Parliament alone could change the legal succession, meaning only elected lawmakers could fundamentally alter who inherited the throne. Yet royal approval could still begin consultations, influence future legislation, and reshape regency powers or household authority long before any public vote occurred. Charles read the first page and admitted the signature was his. He had authorized advisors to examine continuity options, believing they concerned temporary arrangements during illness or incapacity. The king insisted he had never approved a plan reaching into William's future reign. Anne answered by placing the later drafts beside his hand. Those papers went far beyond emergency protection. They proposed limits on the future monarch's control over appointments, estates, staff, and ceremonial authority. She told her brother that whatever he believed he had signed, others had used his approval to build something far more dangerous. Charles removed his glasses. He read Camilla's handwritten note beside the authorization, then set both pages down without speaking. The silence cut deeper than anger, because the monarch could no longer pretend this was a misunderstanding created by distant officials. Camilla finally told him the truth. She had acted because he repeatedly avoided discussing what would happen to her after his death. The queen consort feared losing her home, her staff, her public role, and every trace of influence she had built beside him. Charles felt betrayed, but responsibility followed quickly. His refusal to set clear boundaries had allowed his wife and her advisors to treat silence as permission. Love had not directly ordered the scheme, yet love had made him unwilling to stop it early. Anne demanded immediate action. Every copy had to be recovered, every consultation ended, and William informed before another person could shape the discovery for their own advantage. The king hesitated. He feared his son would read the authorization as proof that Camilla's security mattered more than his inheritance. Still, Charles signed an immediate suspension order, freezing the proposal and removing it from further review. Anne watched his pen stop before the permanent destruction directive. He had suspended the plan, but he had not yet killed it. Then footsteps sounded beyond the library doors. William had arrived. The proposal had been suspended, but suspension was not absolution, and the moment the prince entered the room, private constitutional maneuvering became an irreversible family reckoning. William expected a discussion about schedules, estates, or another disagreement requiring careful royal diplomacy. Instead, Anne handed him a document describing his future reign as a threat that required legal restraint. He read the sentence once, then again, as though repetition might change its meaning. It did not. The prince had prepared all his life to inherit responsibility from his father. He had never prepared to discover that members of his own family had explored ways to limit him before he reached the throne. Anne spoke first. She explained where the files had been found, why the markings proved they were authentic, and how emergency continuity planning had slowly become a proposal aimed at William's future authority. Continuity planning means preparing for the monarchy to function during illness or crisis, but these drafts went far beyond temporary protection. They reached into the next reign. William studied the handwritten notes. Several referred to private conversations he believed had taken place only between himself and Charles. The future king recognized his own words, stripped of context, and used as evidence that his independence required control. His reaction was silence. He folded the page carefully, placed it on the table, and asked his father whether he had approved those words. Charles answered that he authorized an inquiry, not the final proposal. The king tried to separate his signature from what followed, but William heard no innocence in that distinction. He heard dangerous carelessness. Authority had been given, boundaries had not, and others had filled the silence. Camilla attempted to explain her fear. She said she believed William would remove her from royal life once the next reign began. The queen consort insisted she wanted security, not his throne. William answered without raising his voice. Her residence, staff, title, and dignity could have been discussed openly. None of that required secret scrutiny of the succession, or private limits on his future power. The prince acted immediately. He suspended cooperation between his household and every advisor named in the files, until an independent review could determine who expanded Charles's authorization. Such a review meant an inquiry conducted outside the accused offices, preventing those involved from controlling the evidence. Charles flinched at his son's decisiveness. Anne did not. She recognized the calm leadership Elizabeth II had spent years encouraging in William, even as the decision widened the fracture inside the family. Camilla asked to speak with him alone. He refused. The Queen Consort left the library and stopped in the corridor as the door closed behind her. For the first time, she understood that the plan created to preserve her place had pushed her further outside William's trust. William turned back to Charles. He said trust could not be repaired through another private arrangement. Every final decision must be written, witnessed, and impossible to reinterpret. The fallout moved quickly. Constitutional staff were removed from duty, and access to succession archives was frozen. Anne feared the response might deepen the personal rupture, but silence would have allowed the plan to survive. William had taken control of the crisis, yet anger could not decide the monarchy's future. That shift would come when father and son finally spoke without protocol between them. After the advisors withdrew and the palace corridors fell silent, Charles asked William to remain behind. For the first time since the files surfaced, there were no lawyers, no aides, and no women standing between them. Only a father who had failed to define the limits of his authority, and a son who felt his future had been negotiated in secret. What followed was not a constitutional meeting, it was a confession. Charles stood beside the table, while the suspended proposal remained between them. The king admitted that his deepest mistake was not the signature alone. It was avoiding the conversation that signature had replaced. He had feared speaking openly about Camilla's future, because doing so meant admitting that his own reign would one day end. William listened without interrupting. The prince said the cruel language in the files had wounded him, but Charles's silence had cut deeper. His father had allowed discussions about the next reign to continue without once asking the man expected to carry it. The king finally said what he had hidden from everyone. Protecting Camilla had become so tangled with protecting his own happiness that he stopped seeing where private loyalty endangered public duty. He had reassured his wife without setting limits, then trusted others to interpret words he had never clearly defined. William's anger softened into sadness. He realized his father had failed both sides. Camilla had been given comfort without certainty, while the future king had been given duty without honesty. Charles asked what must happen now. William answered plainly. The proposal had to be permanently withdrawn. Every advisor who expanded it had to be dismissed. A formal declaration had to go before the Privy Council, the senior body that advises the sovereign on major constitutional matters, confirming the existing succession and regency framework beyond dispute. The monarch reached for the destruction directive Anne had prepared. He read it once, signed his full name, and pushed the pen toward his son. The gesture carried no legal requirement, but its meaning was unmistakable. Charles was admitting that fear could not control the future. William did not offer instant forgiveness. Instead, he promised something harder. He would help secure Camilla's residence, staff, dignity, and ceremonial place, but she would hold no power over the next reign. Anne returned moments later. She saw the completed directive, released a breath she had been holding for hours, and sealed the papers inside an evidence case. Charles then spoke to Camilla alone through a documented private conversation. He told her the plan was finished. Her future would be protected through an open family agreement, not altered succession rules. The Queen Consort understood the cost immediately. The strategy designed to preserve her influence had permanently ended her role in constitutional planning. The private decision had saved the succession, but the palace could not hide the dismissals and emergency declarations, and by morning, the world was demanding an explanation. By sunrise, the crisis had escaped the locked rooms of Windsor. Palace officials attempted to contain the story with careful language about administrative restructuring, but the sudden dismissal of constitutional advisors told a far more dramatic story. Across Britain, broadcasters interrupted their schedules, newspapers rebuilt their front pages, and crowds gathered outside royal gates. The monarchy had survived hidden disputes before. This time, the public could see the outline of the fracture before the palace finished explaining it. Buckingham Palace released a formal statement, confirming that Charles had reaffirmed the established succession, suspended several advisors, and ordered a review of unauthorized constitutional proposals. The established succession is the lawful order deciding who inherits the throne. The wording sounded controlled, but one sentence cut through every careful phrase. Private interests had no place in hereditary continuity. The statement did not name Camilla. It did not need to. By mid-morning, her name appeared beside words like succession, influence, and secret plan. The Chronicle Crown captured the mood with a front page dominated by Anne leaving Windsor beneath the headline, "The Princess Who Stopped the Plan." A veteran royal correspondent intensified the storm during a live evening broadcast. He described the crisis as the most serious internal challenge to William's future authority since he became Prince of Wales. That title belongs to the senior heir to the British throne, making any attempt to weaken his future power a direct threat to royal continuity. Crowds gathered outside Buckingham Palace behind the barriers. Some held photographs of Elizabeth II, while others applauded as William's car entered the gates. The reaction mattered, because the public was not merely defending one man. They were defending the clear line of succession the late Queen had spent decades strengthening. Anne watched the coverage alone and felt no triumph. The praise surrounding her name could not erase the damage to Charles, the betrayal felt by William, or the humiliation consuming Camilla. The Queen consort stared at the television as a broadcaster displayed a timeline beginning with the private duchy ceremony. She switched off the screen before the final graphic appeared. The plan meant to protect her place had now made her the symbol of hidden influence. Charles issued a second, personal message through a recorded palace statement. The king accepted responsibility for allowing unclear instructions to create a constitutional risk. William appeared later at a scheduled engagement. He refused to attack his father or Camilla, and said only that the lawful succession was secure, and the family would continue its duty. His restraint changed the story. What began as palace conspiracy became a test of future leadership. The independent review confirmed that the proposal never became law, yet it also proved confidential efforts had been made to shape the next reign. The public had received its explanation, but the final verdict would be measured inside the family, by who accepted responsibility, who surrendered power, and who chose the crown over resentment. The hidden proposal was destroyed under witness. The succession was reaffirmed, and the advisors who carried private fear into constitutional planning were removed. Yet the true ending did not come through legal language. It came when Anne stood before Charles, Camilla, and William and told them what the crisis had exposed. The crown had nearly been weakened, not by an enemy, but by people who loved their place within it so deeply that they began to fear the future. The final review removed the last uncertainty. No succession law had been changed, and no lawful mechanism existed for Camilla's proposal to bypass Parliament or remove William and George. Parliament is the elected body whose approval would be required for a fundamental change to the legal order of inheritance. The secret plan had created danger, but it had never gained the force to steal the throne. Charles signed a permanent royal declaration recognizing William as his uncontested constitutional successor and affirming the established line through Prince George. The king read every sentence before signing, because this document would not merely correct an error. It would close the path that fear had opened. Camilla formally withdrew from meetings involving regency, succession, future household appointments, and the structure of the next reign. Regency is the system used when a sovereign cannot perform royal duties. By stepping away, the queen consort accepted that her personal future could no longer shape decisions about who governed the monarchy. The private family meeting carried no celebration. Camilla returned her copy of the proposal to Anne and admitted through a documented account that fear of abandonment had pushed her across the line between securing dignity and seeking control. She said she no longer wished to keep anything created from fear. Princess Anne accepted the papers without humiliating her. She offered no victory speech and no public punishment. The Princess Royal simply replied that loyalty was not proven by holding influence forever. It was proven by knowing when that influence had to end. William agreed that Camilla would retain her residence, personal staff, charitable roles, and ceremonial respect for the rest of her life. The future king refused revenge, but he made one condition absolute. None of those arrangements could restrict the authority of the next sovereign. Charles then apologized directly to his son for authorizing a process he failed to supervise. The monarch also apologized to Anne for forcing her to defend boundaries he should have protected himself. The hidden files were transferred to a secure royal archive with a complete record of how the proposal began and why it was stopped. No future advisor would be able to revive it in secret. William left knowing his succession was secure. Camilla lost constitutional influence, but kept her dignity. Charles preserved his marriage, but accepted that love could never authorize royal power. Anne restored the line between family fear and national duty. The verdict was final. The monarchy survived because Anne acted before secrecy became policy. Charles accepted responsibility. William chose restraint, and Camilla surrendered a plan that should never have existed. The crisis ended with no throne stolen and no succession overturned. Only a monarchy forced to remember that the crown survives when duty is stronger than fear, and when even those closest to power are willing to let it go. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.